Blood trickled down Tabitha Moore's chin as she stared defiantly into Foreman Vernon Blackwell's rage-contorted face, knowing that her refusal had just cost her more than the brutal beating she'd endured. It might cost her everything in a town where his word was almost law. Casa Grande, Arizona Territory, 1881, the early summer sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Casa Grande, making the air shimmer with heat. Tabitha Moore dabbed at her split lip with a handkerchief, wincing at the sharp pain. The 24-year-old schoolteacher had moved to the Arizona Territory just 6 months prior, seeking independence after her parents' passing left her alone in Boston. The teaching position had seemed like Providence, a fresh start in a growing town with a newly built schoolhouse. Now, as she stumbled toward her small rented room behind the general store, she questioned whether coming west had been the worst mistake of her life. "Miss Moore, good heavens, what's happened to you, Mrs. Abernathy, the storekeeper's wife, rushed from behind the counter as Tabitha entered through the back door, hoping to avoid being seen. "I fell," Tabitha lied, the words feeling bitter on her tongue. "The path near the creek is treacherous in these boots, Mrs. Abernathy's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Those don't look like falling injuries to me, dear." She guided Tabitha to a chair and fetched a basin of cool water. "Was it Blackwell again? That man has been sniffing around you since the day you arrived." Tabitha's silence was answer enough. Vernon Blackwell was the foreman of the Double R Ranch, the largest cattle operation in the territory. He wielded considerable influence in Casa Grande, as the ranch owner, Mr. Rutherford, rarely visited from his home in San Francisco. What Blackwell wanted, Blackwell got except for Tabitha. "He cornered me after school," Tabitha finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Said it was time I stopped playing hard to get. When I refused his advances, he became enraged." She closed her eyes, trying to block out the memory of his hands on her, his whiskey-soured breath against her face. "We need to tell Sheriff Jenkins," Mrs. Abernathy insisted. Tabitha shook her head. "The sheriff and Blackwell drink together every Friday. Besides, who would believe my word against his? I'm just the Eastern schoolteacher who doesn't understand frontier customs." The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Mrs. Abernathy sighed, knowing Tabitha was right. "At least let me tend to those cuts." "You can't face the children tomorrow looking like this." The children. Tabitha hadn't thought that far ahead. How could she explain her appearance to 20 curious students? What example would she be setting that women should accept such treatment as part of life as Mrs. Abernathy cleaned her wounds. The bell above the store's front door jingled. Through the curtains separating the living quarters from the store, Tabitha glimpsed a tall figure entering. A stranger, by the look of him dusty from the trail, with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. "Be right with you," Mrs. Abernathy called out. She lowered her voice to Tabitha. "Rest here, I'll handle the customer." Tabitha nodded gratefully, sinking back into the chair as the older woman disappeared through the curtain. "Afternoon, madam," she heard a deep voice say. "Just rode into town. Looking to stock up on supplies before heading out to the Kirby spread." "The Circle K, you must be the new hand Samuel Kirby hired," Mrs. Abernathy replied. "Yes, madam, Samuel Kirby's my uncle, named Seth Kirby." Tabitha found herself oddly drawn to the stranger's voice, warm like sun-baked earth, with a slight Texas drawl that softened his words. She shifted to peek through the gap in the curtain. The man had removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair that curled at the nape of his neck. Tall and broad-shouldered, he stood with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. He couldn't be much older than 30, she guessed, though the sun had weathered his tanned face. "Your uncle mentioned you were coming," Mrs. Abernathy was saying. "Said you had experience with cattle drives in Texas." "Yes, madam, been working ranches since I was 16. Thought it was time to put down some roots, though. Uncle Sam's offer came at the right time." As he spoke, Seth Kirby's gaze drifted toward the curtain, as if sensing Tabitha's presence. For a heart-stopping moment, their eyes met through the gap. Something flickered in his expression, concern, perhaps, as he noticed the bruising visible on her face. Tabitha quickly stepped back, embarrassed to be caught staring. She heard Mrs. Abernathy continue, well, we're glad to have another Kirby in Casa Grande. The Circle K is small compared to the Double R, but your uncle runs an honest operation. That's why I'm here. Uncle Sam always said a man could build something worthwhile in Arizona if he was willing to work hard and deal fair. There was a pause. Something wrong at the Double R I should know about, Mrs. Abernathy hesitated. Let's just say Vernon Blackwell, their foreman, doesn't share your uncle's views on fair dealing. Another pause. I'll keep that in mind. Tabitha listened as Mrs. Abernathy helped him gather supplies. Their conversation turned to practicalities: the price of flour, the quality of local tobacco, the best place to get a hot meal in town. Soon the transaction was complete. Much obliged, madam, Seth said. I'll be seeing you again soon, I expect. You ride careful now, Mrs. Abernathy replied. And tell your uncle hello from the Abernathys. The bell jingled again as he departed. Mrs. Abernathy returned to find Tabitha still standing where she'd left her. Handsome young man, that Seth Kirby, she remarked with a knowing smile. And single, too. Tabitha felt a flush creep up her neck. I hardly noticed. Of course you didn't, Mrs. Abernathy chuckled. Now let me finish with those cuts and then you should rest. Tomorrow's another day. But as Tabitha lay in bed that night, sleep eluded her. Her body ached from Blackwell's beating, but it was the fear that kept her awake. What would happen the next time she encountered him? Would he be satisfied with just bruises, or would his violence escalate? And how long could she continue teaching in Casa Grande if he was determined to make her life miserable? The stranger's Seth's face floated into her mind. There had been something in his eyes when he'd spotted her injuries. Not pity, which she would have detested, but a quiet intensity that had made her heart beat faster. She pushed the thought away. A handsome cowboy was the last thing she needed to complicate her already precarious situation. Dawn broke with the distant sound of cattle lowing. Tabitha rose and examined her face in the small mirror above her washbasin. The swelling had gone down somewhat, but the bruises had darkened overnight. She carefully applied rice powder to mask the worst of the damage and pinned her honey-brown hair into a severe bun, hoping to draw attention away from her face. As she walked toward the schoolhouse, she rehearsed the explanation she would give the children: a stumble on the rocky path, an unfortunate encounter with a door. The lies tasted bitter, but what choice did she have, Miss Moore? The voice froze her in place. Slowly, she turned to face Vernon Blackwell, who sat astride his horse in the middle of the street. At 38, he was still an imposing figure, tall and barrel-chested, with a meticulously trimmed mustache that did little to soften his hard features. Mr. Blackwell, she acknowledged stiffly, fighting the urge to flee. He dismounted, tying his horse to a nearby hitching post before approaching her. Tabitha glanced around desperately, but the street was largely empty at this early hour. You're looking well this morning, he said, his eyes trailing over the bruises his fists had left. I trust you've had time to reconsider our conversation yesterday. Tabitha lifted her chin. There is nothing to reconsider, Mr. Blackwell. My answer remains the same. His smile didn't reach his eyes. You Eastern women have curious notions about propriety. Out here in the territories, a woman needs protection. I'm offering you that protection. What you're offering is not protection, but ownership, Tabitha countered, surprised by her own boldness. And I belong to no man. Blackwell stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his breath. You misunderstand the situation, Miss Moore. Casa Grande is a small town. Accidents happen. Teachers can be replaced. A chill ran down Tabitha's spine at the thinly veiled threat. Are you threatening me, Mr. Blackwell? Merely stating facts, Miss Moore. He reached out to touch her cheek, and she flinched away. I can be patient, to a point, but a man has his pride. Threatening a lady doesn't speak much to a man's pride where I come from. The new voice startled them both. Seth Kirby stood a few paces away, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. In the morning light, Tabitha could see he was even more handsome than she'd thought, strong-jawed, with eyes the color of a summer storm. Blackwell turned slowly. This doesn't concern you, stranger. Name's Kirby. Seth Kirby, he said, stepping forward and offering his hand. Just arrived from Texas to work my uncle's spread, and where I'm from, when a lady looks uncomfortable, it becomes every gentleman's concern. Blackwell ignored the outstretched hand. Kirby, eh? Samuel Kirby's nephew? His eyes narrowed. Well, Kirby, let me offer some friendly advice. Casa Grande has its own ways. Best you learn them quick if you plan to stay. I'm a fast learner, Seth replied, his tone light but his eyes hard. First lesson seems to be that some men around here forget how to treat a lady. That right, miss? Moore, Tabitha supplied. Tabitha Moore, Miss Moore, Seth nodded, tipping his hat. I was just heading to get some breakfast before riding out to the Circle K. Would you care to join me? I'd value some local insight about the town. Before Blackwell could interject, Tabitha smiled. I'd be delighted, Mr. Kirby, though I can only spare a brief time before school begins. Seth offered his arm, which she took gratefully. As they walked past Blackwell, Seth added casually, Good day to you, sir. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other, what with Casa Grande being such a small town and all. Blackwell's face darkened with barely controlled rage. Count on it, Kirby, he spat. Count on it. Once they were out of earshot, Tabitha let out a shaky breath. Thank you, Mr. Kirby, your timing was fortunate. Seth, please, he corrected gently, and I wish I'd arrived a day earlier. His eyes lingered on the partially concealed bruises on her face. Was that his doing? Tabitha hesitated, then nodded. Yesterday after school, he's been persistent in his attentions since I arrived 6 months ago. Yesterday, he decided he was tired of waiting for my affirmative response. Seth's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. Have you reported this to the sheriff? A bitter laugh escaped her. Sheriff Jenkins and Mr. Blackwell are drinking companions. Besides, it would be my word against his, and Mr. Blackwell practically runs this town in Mr. Rutherford's absence. They reached the small cafe that served as Casa Grande's only restaurant. Seth held the door for her, and they found a quiet table near the back. So you're the schoolteacher? Seth asked once they were seated. Yes, for the past 6 months. I came from Boston after my parents passed away. That's a long way to travel alone. Tabitha smiled faintly. I wanted a fresh start. The teaching position seemed perfect, a chance to do something meaningful while supporting myself. And it would have been if not for men like Blackwell, Seth observed. He's been attentive since my arrival. At first it was just uncomfortable glances, then unwanted gifts I returned, and finally, direct proposals I refused. Yesterday was the first time he became physical. She unconsciously touched her bruised cheek. Their conversation paused as the waitress brought coffee. Seth waited until they were alone again before speaking. Miss Moore, Tabitha, please, he nodded. Tabitha, what Blackwell did is inexcusable, and his threats this morning concern me. A man who would strike a woman once will do so again, especially when his pride is wounded. I'm aware, she replied quietly, but I have few options. This position is my livelihood. Seth considered her words. My uncle is a good man. He holds considerable respect in this territory, even if his ranch is smaller than the Double R. Perhaps he could speak with the town council about Blackwell's behavior. And risk making things worse. Tabitha shook her head. I appreciate your concern, truly, but I've handled difficult situations before. Not like this, Seth countered gently. Not with a man like Blackwell, who clearly believes he's entitled to whatever and whoever he wants. Before Tabitha could respond, the cafe door opened and several children entered with their mother. Upon seeing Tabitha, they rushed over excitedly. Miss Moore, are you coming to school now? Billy said you might not come because you got hurt. Tabitha smiled at her pupils, pushing her troubles aside. Of course I'm coming. We have our geography lesson today, remember? As the children chattered, Tabitha became aware of Seth watching her, a thoughtful expression on his face. When the children's mother called them away, he spoke again. You're good with them. They're wonderful children, Tabitha replied, genuine warmth in her voice. Teaching them is the one bright spot in all of this. Seth nodded, then glanced at the clock on the cafe wall. I should let you get to your students, but please be careful with Blackwell. Men like him don't take rejection well, especially public rejection. I will, she promised, rising from her chair. And thank you again for your intervention this morning. Seth stood as well. I'll be staying at the Circle K, but I'll be in town regularly. If you need anything at all, leave word with Mrs. Abernathy. She knows how to reach me." Something in his earnest offer touched Tabitha deeply. "That's very kind, Seth." "It's not kindness," he replied seriously. "It's decency, something Blackwell could stand to learn." As they parted ways outside the cafe, Tabitha felt a curious mixture of emotions. Fear of Blackwell remained, but now there was something else too, a warmth that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun beating down on the dusty street. The school day passed without incident, though Tabitha caught several of the older children staring curiously at her bruises. She fielded their questions with practiced ease, sticking to her story about a fall on the rocky path. Whether they believed her or not, they were too well-mannered to press the issue. As the final bell rang and the children gathered their slates and books, Tabitha felt a sense of accomplishment. Despite everything, she had made it through the day. She was straightening the classroom when a shadow fell across the doorway. "Miss Moore." The voice sent ice through her veins. Vernon Blackwell stood in the schoolhouse doorway, his massive frame blocking the light. Tabitha instinctively stepped back, putting the teacher's desk between them. "Mr. Blackwell, school is finished for the day." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded to Tabitha like a gunshot. "I thought we might continue our conversation from this morning, before we were so rudely interrupted." "There's nothing to discuss," Tabitha said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I've given you my answer repeatedly." Blackwell moved further into the room, his boots loud on the wooden floor. "That Kirby fellow, he's filled your head with nonsense, hasn't he, making you think you have options." "My decision about you was made long before I met Mr. Kirby," Tabitha countered, edging toward the side door that led to the schoolyard. Blackwell's laugh was cold. "You Eastern women are all the same, full of fancy ideas about independence. Out here, reality is different. A woman needs a man's protection." "What I need," Tabitha said firmly, "is for you to leave my classroom now." Blackwell's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, Tabitha. I've been patient, more patient than most men would be, but even my patience has limits." He took another step forward, and Tabitha grabbed her pointer stick, a flimsy defense, but better than nothing. "Stay back," she warned. The foreman smirked. "Or what? You'll wrap my knuckles like one of your students?" His expression hardened. "Put that down before you hurt yourself." "She asked you to leave." For the second time that day, Seth Kirby's voice cut through a confrontation. He stood in the side doorway, his expression calm but his eyes cold as he assessed the situation. Blackwell's face contorted with rage. "You again. This is becoming tiresome, Kirby." "Funny, I was thinking the same thing," Seth replied, stepping fully into the classroom. "Seems like you have trouble understanding when a lady isn't interested." "This is none of your concern," Blackwell growled. "I'm making it my concern." Seth's voice remained even, but there was steel beneath the calm. "Now, I suggest you leave Miss Moore alone and walk out that door while you still can." For a tense moment, Tabitha thought Blackwell might attack Seth right there in the schoolhouse. His hands curled into fists and a vein pulsed visibly in his forehead, but after a long, charged silence, he relaxed slightly. "This isn't over," he said, looking from Seth to Tabitha. "Not by a long shot." He jabbed a finger toward Seth. "And you, Kirby, you'd best watch your back. Accidents happen to newcomers who don't understand the way things work around here." Seth simply held the door open. "Good day, Mr. Blackwell." With a final glare, Blackwell stormed out. Once he was gone, Tabitha sagged against the desk, the pointer stick clattering to the floor from her suddenly nerveless fingers. "Are you all right?" Seth asked, moving quickly to her side. "Yes," she managed, though her voice shook. "Thank heaven you came when you did. How did you know?" "I didn't," Seth admitted. "I was heading back to the Circle K when I saw Blackwell enter the schoolhouse. After this morning, I didn't like the idea of him finding you alone." He hesitated. "I hope I didn't overstep." Tabitha shook her head. "No, not at all. I'm grateful." She looked up at him curiously. "Though I thought you'd be at your uncle's ranch by now." A faint smile touched his lips. "I got delayed in town, wanted to make sure a certain schoolteacher made it through her day without further trouble." The simple admission warmed her. "That was very thoughtful." "Like I said, it's not kindness, it's decency." Seth glanced toward the door Blackwell had exited. "But I'm concerned about his threats. He doesn't strike me as a man who gives up easily. He isn't, Tabitha confirmed, and he holds considerable power in Casa Grande. Seth was quiet for a moment, thinking. Would you allow me to escort you home? I'd feel better knowing you got there safely. Tabitha hesitated only briefly before nodding. Thank you, I'd appreciate that, as they walked through town toward Mrs. Abernathy's store. Tabitha was acutely aware of the curious glances from townsfolk. A new man in town escorting the schoolteacher home would certainly set tongues wagging, especially after her very public encounter with Blackwell that morning. People are staring, she murmured. Let them, Seth replied easily. Gives them something to talk about besides cattle prices and the weather. Despite everything, Tabitha found herself laughing. You don't mind being the subject of gossip. I've been the subject of worse, he said with a shrug. Then more seriously, but if it bothers you, I understand. No, she said quickly, perhaps too quickly. I don't mind, it's just unusual for me to be the center of attention. Seth glanced at her. I find that hard to believe. A woman like you must turn heads wherever she goes. The compliment brought heat to Tabitha's cheeks. Hardly. In Boston, I was just one of many educated young women. Here, she gestured vaguely. Here, I'm something of an oddity, the unmarried schoolteacher from back east with her books and ideas. And that's what drew Blackwell to you, Seth observed. You're different, a challenge. Men like him can't resist trying to break what they don't understand. His insight surprised her. You seem to know a lot about men like Vernon Blackwell. I've encountered my share, Seth admitted. Men who confuse power with right, who think their position entitles them to whatever or whoever they want. A shadow crossed his face. My sister suffered because of such a man back in Texas. I'm sorry, Tabitha said softly. Is that why you left? Seth nodded slowly. Partly. The man who hurt her was the son of the largest rancher in the county, when I confronted him. He trailed off, then shrugged. Let's just say it became necessary for me to seek opportunities elsewhere. They had reached the back entrance to Mrs. Abernathy's store. Tabitha turned to face him. Thank you for telling me that and for walking me home. My pleasure. He tipped his hat. I'll be heading to the Circle K now, but I meant what I said. If you need anything, leave word with Mrs. Abernathy. I will, she promised. And Seth, please be careful. Blackwell isn't someone to take lightly. A slow smile spread across his face. I never take threats lightly, Tabitha, especially when they involve people I care about. Before she could respond to the implication in his words, he tipped his hat again and turned to go. Tabitha watched him until he disappeared around the corner, a curious feeling of loss settling in her chest. Inside, Mrs. Abernathy was waiting with keen interest. I saw you walking with Samuel Kirby's nephew, she said, not bothering to hide her curiosity. Twice in one day, no less. Tabitha sighed, knowing there was no avoiding the conversation. He intervened when Vernon Blackwell was threatening me, both this morning and again after school. Mrs. Abernathy's expression darkened. That Blackwell's getting bolder. You need to be careful, dear. I know. Tabitha sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. But what can I do? I can't leave this position is all I have, and I won't give in to Blackwell's demands. Of course you won't, Mrs. Abernathy said firmly. No decent woman would, but that doesn't mean you have to face him alone. She bustled around the kitchen, putting on water for tea. This Seth Kirby seems like a good sort. His uncle certainly is. Samuel Kirby is one of the few men in this territory who might stand up to the double Articus influence. Seth suggested his uncle might help, Tabitha admitted. But I'm reluctant to involve others in my problems. Mrs. Abernathy fixed her with a stern look. Pride is all well and good, Tabitha, but it won't stop a man like Blackwell. Sometimes, accepting help is the strongest thing you can do. Tabitha mulled over the older woman's words as she sipped her tea. Could she bring herself to seek Samuel Kirby's assistance? And what of Seth, with his quiet strength and direct gaze that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed composure? That night, as she prepared for bed, Tabitha found herself drawn to the small window that faced west toward the Circle K ranch. Somewhere out there, Seth Kirby was settling into his new home. The thought brought an unexpected comfort. The next morning, Tabitha awoke to the sound of raised voices from the store. Dressing quickly, she emerged from her room to find Mrs. Abernathy arguing with Sheriff Jenkins. "She's not involved in any of this, Frank, and you know it," Mrs. Abernathy was saying heatedly. "I need to speak with her all the same," the sheriff insisted. He noticed Tabitha and nodded curtly. "Miss Moore got some questions for you about yesterday." "What about yesterday?" Tabitha asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. Sheriff Jenkins, a stocky man in his 50s with a perpetually red face, adjusted his gun belt. "Vernon Blackwell claims you and some newcomer named Kirby threatened him, says Kirby drew a gun on him right here in town." "That's a lie," Tabitha exclaimed. "Mr. Kirby never drew a weapon. He merely asked Mr. Blackwell to leave me alone after Mr. Blackwell threatened me." The sheriff's expression remained skeptical. "Blackwell says different, says this Kirby fella ambushed him, threatened to run him out of town." "And you believe that?" Mrs. Abernathy asked incredulously. "Frank Jenkins, you've known me for 15 years. Would I lie to you?" "Not saying you would, Martha," the sheriff replied uncomfortably. "But Blackwell's the foreman of the Double R. His word carries weight." "More weight than the truth?" Tabitha asked quietly. "Sheriff, Mr. Blackwell has been harassing me for months. Yesterday, he cornered me in the schoolhouse after the children left and made threatening remarks. Mr. Kirby happened to arrive and asked him to leave. That's all that happened." Jenkins studied her face, noting the fading bruises. "And those marks, Blackwell do that too?" Tabitha hesitated, then nodded. "The day before yesterday, when I refused his proposition," the sheriff sighed heavily. "That complicates things." "It shouldn't," Mrs. Abernathy interjected. "A man who beats a woman should be in jail, not filing false complaints." "It's not that simple, Martha. The Double R employs half the men in this territory. Rutherford's money built most of this town. So justice is for sale in Casa Grande." Tabitha asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Jenkins had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I'll talk to Blackwell, try to calm things down, but this Kirby fellow would do well to keep his distance. Blackwell's not a man to cross." After the sheriff left, Tabitha sank into a chair, dismayed. "He's not going to do anything, is he?" Mrs. Abernathy shook her head. "Not likely. Frank's not a bad man, but he's weak, and the Double R has deep pockets." She patted Tabitha's hand. "But don't you worry. There are still good people in Casa Grande who won't stand for this kind of behavior." Tabitha tried to take comfort in the older woman's words as she headed to the schoolhouse. The day passed slowly, her mind constantly returning to Seth and the trouble he might be in because of her. By the time the last child left for the day, she had resolved to ride out to the Circle K and warn him personally about Blackwell's false accusations. Mrs. Abernathy was initially reluctant to let her go alone, but relented when Tabitha pointed out that the journey to the Circle K was relatively safe, following the main road for most of the way. Armed with directions and a borrowed mare, Tabitha set out in the late afternoon. The landscape of the Arizona Territory had an austere beauty that still captivated her after 6 months. The vast open spaces, the distant purple mountains, the incredible blue of the sky, all so different from the crowded streets and neat gardens of Boston. As she rode, Tabitha felt a sense of freedom she rarely experienced within the confines of Casa Grande. The Circle K came into view as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. It was a modest spread compared to the sprawling Double R, but well-maintained with a tidy main house, a bunkhouse, barn, and several corrals. As Tabitha approached, she saw a man working with a horse in one of the pens. Even at a distance, she recognized Seth's broad shoulders and distinctive hat. He looked up at the sound of her horse, surprise evident on his face as he recognized her. Setting aside the rope he'd been using, he walked over to meet her as she dismounted. "Tabitha," he said, his voice warm with welcome though his eyes held concern. "This is unexpected." "Is everything all right?" "Not exactly," she admitted. "Sheriff Jenkins came to see me this morning. Vernon Blackwell has accused you of threatening him with a gun. I needed to warn you." Seth's expression hardened. "I figured he might try something like that. Are you all right?" "Has he bothered you again?" "No, I haven't seen him today, but I'm worried about you." The sheriff made it clear that Blackwell's word carries considerable weight in Casa Grande. "Come inside," Seth said, taking the reins of her horse. "Uncle Sam will want to hear this too." As he led her toward the main house, Seth called out to a ranch hand to take care of Tabitha's mare. The man nodded, giving Tabitha a curious look before leading the horse toward the barn. The main house of the Circle K was modest but comfortable, with solid furniture and clean, simple decor. Samuel Kirby proved to be a kindly-looking man in his late 50s, with the same storm gray eyes as his nephew, but with silver threading through his dark hair. He welcomed Tabitha warmly, insisting she join them for dinner while they discussed the situation. "Blackwell's been a thorn in my side for years," Samuel said as they sat around the dining table. "Ever since Rutherford put him in charge of the Double R, the man thinks his position gives him the right to do as he pleases. Including assaulting women who refuse his advances," Seth added grimly. Samuel shook his head in disgust. "Miss Moore, I want you to know that you have friends here at the Circle K. Anytime you feel unsafe in town, our door is open to you." "That's very kind, Mr. Kirby," Tabitha replied, touched by the offer. "Not kindness," Seth and Samuel said in unison, then smiled at each other. "Just decency," Samuel finished, "something in short supply when it comes to Vernon Blackwell." As they ate, the conversation turned to strategies for dealing with Blackwell's false accusations. Samuel suggested a meeting with the town council to address both the assault on Tabitha and the subsequent false claims against Seth. "The Double R has influence," he acknowledged, "but they're not the only voice in Casa Grande. There are plenty of decent folks who won't stand for a man beating a woman, no matter who signs his paycheck." "I'm reluctant to make this a public matter," Tabitha admitted. "As the schoolteacher, I'm expected to maintain a certain reputation. Being at the center of such a scandal could cost me my position. And keeping silent could cost you much more," Seth countered gently. "Blackwell's not going to stop. Men like him never do unless they're forced to." The truth of his words settled heavily over the table. After a moment, Samuel spoke again. "We don't have to decide everything tonight. For now, Miss Moore, I insist you stay here at the Circle K. It's too dark for you to ride back to town safely." Tabitha started to protest, but Seth interrupted. "He's right. The trail can be treacherous at night, even if Blackwell wasn't a concern." Seeing the logic in their argument, Tabitha reluctantly agreed. Samuel showed her to a guest room, promising that one of the ranch hands would ride into town at first light to inform Mrs. Abernathy of her whereabouts. Left alone in the comfortable room, Tabitha sat on the edge of the bed, emotions warring within her. Part of her felt a profound relief at finding allies in the Kirbys. Another part worried about the complications her presence might bring to their lives. And a small, traitorous part of her heart thrilled at the prospect of spending more time near Seth, whose quiet strength and unwavering support had begun to affect her in ways she wasn't quite ready to acknowledge. Morning came with the sounds of the ranch awakening horses nickering, men calling to each other as they began their day's work. Tabitha dressed quickly in the same clothes she'd worn the previous day, smoothing the wrinkles as best she could. When she emerged from the guest room, she found Seth waiting in the main room. "Good morning," he greeted her with a smile. "Sleep well." "Better than I expected," she admitted. "Your uncle has a lovely home. He's built it piece by piece over the years," Seth said, pride evident in his voice. "Uncle Sam came out here with nothing but determination and a knowledge of cattle. Everything you see, he earned through hard work and fair dealing." As they spoke, Samuel joined them, and the three shared a hearty breakfast. Afterward, Seth offered to escort Tabitha back to town. "I need to speak with the blacksmith anyway," he explained. "Uncle Sam's been trying to convince me that we should get our side of the story to Sheriff Jenkins before Blackwell can cause more trouble. And I've agreed," Tabitha said, surprising herself. "You were right last night. Staying silent only gives men like Blackwell more power." The ride to Casa Grande was pleasant despite the circumstances. Seth proved to be an engaging companion, sharing stories of his life in Texas and asking thoughtful questions about Tabitha's experiences in Boston. "What made you decide to become a teacher?" he asked as they rode side by side. Tabitha considered the question. "I've always loved learning. My father was a professor at Harvard, and our home was filled with books. He encouraged my education at a time when many men thought higher learning was wasted on women. He sounds like a wise man. He was, Tabitha said softly. After he and my mother died of influenza last year, teaching seemed the natural path. It was either that or marriage to one of Boston's eligible bachelors, most of whom viewed education in a woman as a charming novelty at best, a threatening aberration at worst. Seth nodded thoughtfully. So you came west instead? Yes. The advertisement for a teacher in Casa Grande appeared in the Boston newspaper at just the right moment. It felt like destiny, she laughed softly. Though I'm not sure destiny was supposed to include Vernon Blackwell. Seth's expression darkened at the mention of the foreman's name. Some obstacles aren't part of destiny, they're just men making bad choices. They rode in companionable silence for a while before Tabitha asked, "What about you? Why did you choose ranching?" "I grew up on a small ranch outside San Antonio," Seth replied. "My father died when I was 15 and I took over running things with my mother and sister. We managed well enough until the drought of '74 forced us to sell. After that, I worked as a hand on larger spreads, saving what I could. And now you're here to work with your uncle," Seth nodded. Uncle Sam wrote that he was getting too old to manage everything himself, said he needed family he could trust to help build the Circle K for the future. He glanced at her. "I wasn't sure about coming at first, but now I'm glad I did." The way he looked at her made Tabitha's heart quicken. There was something in his gaze, a warmth, an appreciation that went beyond mere friendship. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a life where such feelings could be explored freely, without the shadow of Vernon Blackwell looming over them. The moment was broken as Casa Grande came into view. Reality rushed back, bringing with it all the complications they faced. As they rode into town, Tabitha became aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Word of her overnight absence had clearly spread, and being seen returning with Seth would only fuel the gossip. "Perhaps we should separate here," she suggested reluctantly. "People are already talking." Seth's jaw tightened. "Let them talk. I'm not leaving you alone until I know you're safe." His protectiveness both warmed and concerned her. "Seth, I appreciate your concern, truly. But I can't hide behind you forever. I have a life here, responsibilities." "I know," he acknowledged. "But at least let me see you to Mrs. Abernathy's, then I'll go speak with the sheriff." Tabitha nodded her agreement, and they continued toward the general store. As they approached, the door opened, and Mrs. Abernathy rushed out to meet them. "Tabitha, thank heavens you're safe. When Samuel's man came this morning to say you'd stayed at the Circle K, I was relieved, but then," she broke off, glancing nervously at Seth. "What is it?" Tabitha asked, suddenly anxious. Mrs. Abernathy wrung her hands. "It's Blackwell. He came by earlier asking questions about your whereabouts. When I told him it was none of his concern, he made threats. Said if you weren't back by noon, he'd make sure the school board knew about your inappropriate behavior." "What?" Tabitha gasped. "That's absurd. There was nothing inappropriate about my stay at the Circle K. I was in the guest room, completely proper." "You and I know that, Mrs. Abernathy said grimly, "but Blackwell's spinning a different tale, and given your overnight absence and return with Mr. Kirby here." Seth's expression had hardened during this exchange. "We need to act now," he said decisively, "before Blackwell can spread more lies." "I'll go to the school board directly," Tabitha decided. "Explain the situation before Blackwell can twist it further." "And I'll speak with the sheriff," Seth added. It's time Vernon Blackwell answered for his actions. As they separated, Tabitha to her room to freshen up before meeting the school board chairman, and Seth to the sheriff's office, neither noticed the figure watching from the shadows of the livery stable. Vernon Blackwell's face was twisted with rage as he observed their easy familiarity, the obvious concern they showed for each other. His hand tightened on the knife at his belt. One way or another, he would make them both pay for their defiance. Tabitha changed quickly into her most respectable dress and pinned her hair neatly. The bruises on her face were fading, but still visible evidence she hoped would support her account of Blackwell's violence. With a deep breath to steady herself, she set out for the home of Jeremiah Foster, the chairman of the school board. Mr. Foster, a successful merchant who had helped fund the building of the schoolhouse, received her in his study. His expression was grave as she explained the situation, detailing Blackwell's harassment, the assault, and now his attempts to damage her reputation. "This is a serious matter, Miss Moore," Foster said when she had finished. "Very serious indeed." "I understand, Mr. Foster. But I want you to know that my conduct has been beyond reproach. My overnight stay at the Circle K was out of concern for my safety, nothing more." Foster nodded slowly. "I believe you, Miss Moore. I've observed your character these past 6 months, and it has been exemplary. And I must say, these accusations from Blackwell trouble me deeply." He rose from his chair, pacing the room. "You should know that you're not the first woman in Casa Grande to complain about his behavior. This revelation surprised Tabitha. There have been others." "Yes, though most were too frightened to speak openly as you have." Foster's expression darkened. "My own niece was subjected to his unwanted attentions last year. She eventually left town rather than continue enduring his pursuit." A surge of anger rose in Tabitha. "And nothing was done." "Rutherford values Blackwell's management of the Double R. Complaints have been discouraged." Foster sighed heavily. "But perhaps it's time for that to change. I'll call an emergency meeting of the school board this afternoon. I want you to tell them exactly what you've told me." Meanwhile, Seth's conversation with Sheriff Jenkins was proving less productive. "I understand your concerns, Kirby," the sheriff said, leaning back in his chair, "but it's your word against Blackwell's. And in this town, Blackwell's word carries more weight," Seth finished bitterly. "Even when he's lying about threatening a woman." Jenkins had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I'm not saying I don't believe you, but without witnesses. What about Miss Moore's injuries? Are those not evidence enough?" The sheriff shifted in his seat. "Could have happened any number of ways." "Falls, accidents, stop," Seth interrupted, his patience wearing thin. "We both know what happened. Blackwell assaulted Miss Moore because she refused his advances. Now he's trying to ruin her reputation because she dared to seek protection elsewhere." Jenkins sighed, running a hand over his face. "Look, Kirby, I sympathize. Really, I do. But my hands are tied unless someone besides you and Miss Moore comes forward." As Seth left the sheriff's office, frustration burning in his gut, he nearly collided with one of the Double R Ranch hands he recognized from town. "Kirby," the man acknowledged with a nod. "Been looking for you." Seth tensed, ready for trouble. "What can I do for you?" The man Miller, Seth recalled, glanced around nervously before speaking in a low voice. "Heard about what happened with Blackwell and the schoolteacher, wanted you to know." "She ain't the first." Seth's interest sharpened. "Go on." "Blackwell's got a history of forcing himself on women who catch his eye. Most are too scared to talk about it, but some of us at the Double R, we ain't proud to be working under a man like that." "Why are you telling me this?" Miller shifted uncomfortably. "My sister works at the hotel. Last year, Blackwell cornered her in one of the rooms she was cleaning if another guest hadn't walked by." He trailed off, his meaning clear. "I wanted to do something then, but I needed the job, still do." "But you're willing to talk now." "Not publicly," Miller admitted. "But I thought you should know you're not alone in wanting Blackwell gone. There are others who feel the same way." This conversation gave Seth an idea. If multiple people had suffered from Blackwell's behavior, perhaps they could be convinced to stand together. One voice might be ignored, but several would be harder to dismiss. As he pondered this, Seth caught sight of Tabitha walking purposefully across the street. Her expression was determined, her posture straight and proud despite everything she'd endured. Admiration swelled in his chest. In just a few days, this remarkable woman had shown more courage than many men he'd known in his life. He hurried to catch up with her, calling her name. She turned, her face lighting with a smile that sent warmth spreading through him. "Seth, I was just looking for you. Mr. Foster has called an emergency meeting of the school board for this afternoon. He wants us both to attend." "That's excellent news," Seth replied. "And I've just had an interesting conversation with one of the Double R hands. It seems Blackwell has a history of this behavior with other women in town." Tabitha's eyes widened. "Mr. Foster said something similar about his niece. If we could find these women, convince them to speak out." "That's exactly what I was thinking," Seth agreed. "Together, our voices would be much harder to ignore." As they discussed their plan, neither noticed Vernon Blackwell watching from across the street, his expression murderous. Seeing them together, obviously strategizing against him, was the final straw. He tried to be patient, tried to play by the rules of civilized society. But now it was time for more direct action. Blackwell slipped away, his mind working furiously. By nightfall, he decided this problem would be resolved once and for all. The school board meeting was held in the town hall, a modest building that served multiple functions in Casa Grande. Tabitha and Seth arrived to find several board members already seated around the large table, their expressions varying from concern to curiosity. Jeremiah Foster welcomed them and made introductions. Besides himself, the board consisted of the town doctor, the owner of the bank, and two prominent ranchers from the area. Notably absent was anyone from the Double R, though Foster explained that Mr. Rutherford had been informed of the meeting by telegram. "We've asked Vernon Blackwell to join us as well," Foster added, "to ensure all sides of this matter are heard." Tabitha tensed at this news, and Seth moved imperceptibly closer to her side. The gesture wasn't lost on the board members, who exchanged knowing glances. "Before Mr. Blackwell arrives," Foster continued, "Miss Moore, perhaps you could share your account with the board." With remarkable composure, Tabitha recounted her experiences with Blackwell over the past months, culminating in the assault 2 days prior. She spoke clearly and directly, her voice steady despite the difficult subject matter. When she finished, a heavy silence fell over the room. Dr. Patterson, the town physician, was the first to speak. "Miss Moore, did you seek medical attention for your injuries?" "No, doctor, Mrs. Abernathy helped me tend to them." The doctor nodded thoughtfully. "Even now, I can see evidence of bruising consistent with the assault you've described. As a medical professional, I find your account credible." "As do I," added Franklin Wilson, one of the ranchers. "My wife has mentioned Blackwell's inappropriate behavior toward the young women in town on more than one occasion." Before further discussion could occur, the door opened, and Vernon Blackwell strode in. He wore his customary formal attire, a black suit that strained against his powerful build, with a bolo tie at his throat. His eyes narrowed when he spotted Tabitha and Seth. "Gentlemen," he greeted the board, deliberately ignoring the others, "I understand there have been some allegations made against me. Please sit down, Mr. Blackwell," Foster said, gesturing to an empty chair across from Tabitha and Seth. "We're discussing serious concerns about your conduct toward Miss Moore." Blackwell sneered as he took the offered seat. "If by conduct you mean my attempts to court Miss Moore properly, only to be rejected in favor of this drifter," he jerked his chin toward Seth, "then yes, I suppose we have something to discuss." "That's not what Miss Moore has told us," Foster replied evenly. "She describes harassment culminating in physical assault when she refused your advances." "Lies," Blackwell spat. "The woman is obviously infatuated with Kirby here and is trying to justify her inappropriate behavior. Spending the night at his ranch, returning with him in the morning, what would you call that, gentlemen, if not scandalous?" Seth started to rise, his face flushing with anger, but Tabitha placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Mr. Blackwell," she said calmly, "my overnight stay at the Circle K was in a guest room with Mr. Samuel Kirby's full knowledge and approval. It was necessary because you had threatened me earlier that day, and it was too late to safely return to town." "More lies," Blackwell insisted. "Gentlemen, surely you can see what's happening here. This woman, this outsider, is attempting to damage my reputation because I dared to point out her immoral behavior." Dr. Patterson cleared his throat. "Mr. Blackwell, the bruises on Miss Moore's face are consistent with her account of being struck. How do you explain those injuries?" For a moment, Blackwell seemed taken aback by the direct question, then he shrugged dismissively. "How would I know? Perhaps she fell, or perhaps her new friend has a temper." Seth surged to his feet, but Foster intervened. "That's enough, Mr. Blackwell. These insinuations are beneath you and this proceeding." "Insinuations?" Blackwell laughed harshly. "I'm merely suggesting alternative explanations, since you all seem so ready to accept her word over mine. I've served the Double R faithfully for 8 years. My reputation in this territory is beyond reproach. Is it?" The new voice came from the doorway, where a woman stood watching the proceedings. Tabitha recognized her as Emma Wilson, the wife of board member Franklin Wilson. Mrs. Wilson stepped into the room, her expression determined. "I've listened to enough of this. Vernon Blackwell, your reputation is far from beyond reproach, and many in this town know it." Emma, her husband, began, but she silenced him with a look. "No, Franklin, it's time someone spoke the truth." She turned to address the board. "Last summer, Blackwell cornered our niece Clara in the mercantile storeroom, if I hadn't walked in when I did." She shuddered at the memory. Clara was too frightened to speak out, especially after Blackwell threatened her position at the store. She eventually left Casa Grande rather than continue living in fear. Blackwell's face darkened. "This is absurd. You have no proof. I saw it with my own eyes." Mrs. Wilson cut him off. And Clara wasn't the only one. There was also Sarah Miller from the hotel, and before her, the widow Johnson who used to run the boarding house. As she spoke, the door opened again, and to everyone's surprise, two more women entered. Sarah Miller, whom Seth had heard about from her brother, and an older woman Tabitha recognized as the former owner of Casa Grande's small boarding house. "We're here to speak the truth as well," Sarah Miller said, her voice trembling slightly but gaining strength as she continued. "Mr. Blackwell has terrorized women in this town for too long. It ends today." For the next hour, the board listened as each woman recounted her experiences with Blackwell. Their stories followed a disturbing pattern: unwanted advances, threats when rejected, and in some cases, physical intimidation or assault. Throughout their testimony, Blackwell grew increasingly agitated, his denials becoming more vehement and less coherent. Finally, Foster called for order. "We've heard enough. Mr. Blackwell, these testimonies present a deeply troubling picture of your conduct as a resident of Casa Grande and as the foreman of the Double R." "This is a conspiracy," Blackwell snarled, "orchestrated by Kirby and this Eastern woman to discredit me. Rutherford will hear of this and you'll all regret it." "Mr. Rutherford has already been informed," Foster replied, revealing a telegram. "This arrived shortly before our meeting began. He expresses grave concern about these allegations and has authorized us to take whatever action we deem necessary to resolve the situation, pending his arrival next week." The color drained from Blackwell's face. "That's impossible. Rutherford trusts me completely." "Apparently his trust has limits," Foster observed, "particularly when it comes to the treatment of women under his indirect employment." He looked to his fellow board members. "Gentlemen, I believe we've heard sufficient evidence to make a determination." After a brief consultation, Foster addressed the room again. "It is the unanimous decision of this board that Vernon Blackwell's conduct has been unacceptable and harmful to members of our community. We recommend his immediate removal as foreman of the Double R Ranch and further recommend to Sheriff Jenkins that criminal charges be considered for the assault on Miss Moore and potentially others." Blackwell leaped to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "You can't do this. I built the Double R into what it is today. Without me, Rutherford has nothing." "That will be for Mr. Rutherford to decide when he arrives," Foster replied calmly. "For now, Mr. Blackwell, I suggest you return to the ranch and prepare to surrender your position to Rutherford's designated replacement." For a moment, it seemed Blackwell might physically attack Foster. His hands clenched into fists, and his body trembled with barely suppressed fury. But then, with a final venomous glare at Tabitha and Seth, he stormed from the room. A collective sigh of relief followed his departure. The women who had testified embraced each other, years of shared fear giving way to the first tentative hope that justice might finally be served. Foster approached Tabitha, his expression grave but kind. "Miss Moore, the board wishes to express its sincere apologies for what you've endured. Your position at the school is secure, and we hope you'll continue educating our children for many years to come." "Thank you, Mr. Foster," Tabitha replied, emotion making her voice unsteady. "I'm grateful for your support and for the courage of these women in coming forward." As the meeting concluded and people began to disperse, Seth drew Tabitha aside. "I don't trust Blackwell to accept this decision peacefully," he said in a low voice. He's been publicly humiliated, his position threatened. Men like him become most dangerous when cornered. Tabitha nodded, recognizing the truth in his words. What do you suggest? Stay with Mrs. Abernathy tonight. I'll speak with Sheriff Jenkins about keeping watch on the store. He hesitated. Tomorrow, if you're willing, I'd like you to come to the Circle K again, just until Rutherford arrives and the situation is fully resolved. The offer was tempting not just for the safety it promised, but for the chance to spend more time in Seth's company. Over these few intense days, he had become important to her in ways she was only beginning to understand. I'll consider it, she said softly. But first, let's make sure tonight passes without incident. Seth walked her back to Mrs. Abernathy's store, both of them alert for any sign of Blackwell. The streets of Casa Grande seemed eerily quiet, as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Mrs. Abernathy greeted them with anxious questions about the meeting. As they recounted what had transpired, her expression shifted from concern to vindication. It's about time someone stood up to that man, she declared. Those poor women suffering in silence all this time. It was their courage that made the difference, Tabitha said. Each one who spoke gave strength to the others. As dusk fell, Seth reluctantly prepared to leave. I'll speak with Jenkins on my way out of town, ask him to keep an eye on things tonight. Lock up tight, and if you hear anything suspicious, anything at all, fire this. He handed Tabitha a small pistol from his belt. I can't take your weapon, she protested. I have another, he assured her, and I'd sleep better knowing you had this. After a moment's hesitation, Tabitha accepted the pistol. It felt heavy and foreign in her hand, but also strangely reassuring. Be careful, she urged as Seth headed for the door. Blackwell will blame you as much as me for today's events. I can handle Vernon Blackwell, Seth replied with quiet confidence. It's you I'm worried about. After he left, Tabitha and Mrs. Abernathy secured the store, checking every window and door twice. The pistol Seth had given her lay on the table between them as they sat drinking tea, conversation sporadic as both listened for sounds from outside. He's a good man, that Seth Kirby, Mrs. Abernathy observed, breaking a lengthy silence. Tabitha smiled faintly. Yes, he is, and handsome too. The older woman's eyes twinkled, not to mention clearly smitten with a certain schoolteacher. Martha, Tabitha protested, feeling her cheeks warm. It's not like that, he's simply being kind. Is that so? Mrs. Abernathy raised an eyebrow. Then I suppose the way you look at him is simply being grateful. Before Tabitha could formulate a response, a sharp crack from outside froze them both. It sounded like a breaking branch or a footstep on the wooden porch. Mrs. Abernathy reached for the pistol, but Tabitha stayed her hand. Let me, she whispered. Stay away from the windows. Heart pounding, Tabitha crept toward the back door, pistol held awkwardly before her. Another sound came, a soft scraping against the door, as if someone was testing the lock. Who's there? She called, her voice steadier than she felt. Silence was the only response. Then, just as Tabitha began to wonder if she'd imagined the noises, a voice came from the other side of the door. It's Sheriff Jenkins, Miss Moore, just checking that everything's secure here. Relief washed over her. One moment, Sheriff. She began to lower the pistol. Miss Moore, Mrs. Abernathy hissed urgently. Sheriff Jenkins went to the saloon an hour ago. I saw him from the window. Horror replaced relief as Tabitha realized the deception. She backed away from the door just as a tremendous crash shook the frame someone was trying to break in. Run, Tabitha cried to Mrs. Abernathy. Go out the front, find help. As the older woman hurried toward the store, Tabitha braced herself, the pistol raised again. The door shuddered under another powerful blow, the wood splintering around the lock. With a final crash, the door burst open, and Vernon Blackwell stood framed in the doorway, a wild look in his eyes and a knife in his hand. There you are, he snarled. You ruined everything, you Eastern witch. Now you're going to pay. Tabitha's hands shook as she aimed the pistol at him. Stay back, Mr. Blackwell, I don't want to shoot you, but I will. Blackwell laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. You won't shoot me, you don't have it in you. He took a step forward. But I'm going to enjoy teaching you a final lesson. Stop right there. A new voice rang out from behind Blackwell. Seth Kirby stood in the yard, his own pistol drawn and aimed squarely at the foreman's back. "Drop the knife, Blackwell, it's over." Blackwell froze, then slowly turned to face Seth. "You," he spat, "this is all your fault. If you hadn't interfered." "I said drop the knife," Seth repeated, his voice hard as iron. "I won't tell you again." For a moment it seemed Blackwell might comply. Then with a roar of rage, he lunged at Seth, the knife flashing in the dim light. The sound of a gunshot split the night. Blackwell staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face as his knife clattered to the ground. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, then back up at Seth. "You shot me," he said, sounding more bewildered than angry. "You actually shot me." "No," Tabitha said softly. "I did." Both men turned to her in shock. She still stood in the doorway, the pistol now steady in her hands, a thin trail of smoke curling from its barrel. Blackwell took a stumbling step toward her, his expression contorted with hate. "You, little." He never finished the sentence. His knees buckled and he collapsed face first onto the ground. Seth rushed to Tabitha's side, gently taking the pistol from her trembling hands. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak as the reality of what she'd done sank in. She had shot a man, possibly killed him. The sound of running footsteps approached. Sheriff Jenkins appeared with Mrs. Abernathy and several townsmen behind him. What in blazes happened here? Jenkins demanded, taking in the scene: the broken door, Blackwell lying motionless on the ground, the pistol in Seth's hands. "Blackwell tried to attack Miss Moore," Seth explained. "She defended herself." Jenkins knelt beside Blackwell, checking for signs of life. "He's still breathing, but barely." "Someone fetch Dr. Patterson, quick." As one of the men ran to obey, Jenkins rose and approached Tabitha. "Miss Moore, I'm going to need a statement from you about what happened here." Tabitha nodded numbly. "He broke in, had a knife, said he was going to teach me a lesson." Her voice faltered. Mrs. Abernathy put a protective arm around her. "Can't this wait until morning, Frank? The poor girl's in shock." Jenkins hesitated, then nodded. "First thing tomorrow, then. For now, Miss Moore should rest, and I'll need that pistol," he added to Seth. As Seth surrendered the weapon, explaining it was his but he'd given it to Tabitha for protection, Mrs. Abernathy guided Tabitha back inside. The store felt violated now, the broken door a stark reminder of the violence that had erupted in what should have been a safe space. "You can't stay here tonight," Mrs. Abernathy declared. "Not with that door in splinters. You'll come to my sister's house with me." Tabitha nodded absently, her mind still struggling to process everything that had happened. Outside, she could hear men's voices as they moved Blackwell, presumably to the doctor's office. Seth appeared in the doorway. "Sheriff Jenkins says he'll post a man here tonight to guard the store, and he's sending a telegram to Rutherford explaining what's happened." Will Mr. Blackwell live?" Tabitha asked hesitantly. "Dr. Patterson thinks so, though the wound is serious." Seth's expression was grim. "Once he recovers, he'll face charges breaking and entering, attempted assault, possibly attempted murder. And me, will I face charges for shooting him?" Seth shook his head firmly. It was clear self-defense. Jenkins already said as much. "No one blames you, Tabitha. You did what you had to do." Despite his reassurance, Tabitha felt the weight of her actions pressing down on her. She had never imagined herself capable of shooting another human being, no matter the provocation. Seeing her distress, Seth moved closer, taking her hands in his. "Listen to me, Tabitha. What happened tonight wasn't your fault. Blackwell made his choice when he decided to come after you with that knife. You protected yourself, just as anyone would have done." His words, spoken with such conviction, provided a small measure of comfort. Tabitha squeezed his hands gratefully. "Thank you for coming back." "If you hadn't been here." "But I was," Seth said simply, "and I always will be if you'll let me." The promise in those words hung between them, full of meaning neither was quite ready to articulate. After a moment, Seth released her hands reluctantly. "Mrs. Abernathy is right, you should rest. Tomorrow will be soon enough to deal with everything else." Tabitha nodded, suddenly exhausted. The events of the day had drained her completely, leaving nothing but a bone-deep weariness. As Seth walked them to Mrs. Abernathy's sister's house, Tabitha found herself leaning on his strength both literally and figuratively. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Sheriff Jenkins took formal statements from Tabitha, Seth, and Mrs. Abernathy about the previous night's events. Dr. Patterson reported that Blackwell was stable but unconscious, the bullet having missed his heart by inches. By midday, word arrived that Mr. Rutherford was cutting short his visit to San Francisco and would arrive in Casa Grande within 2 days to address the situation personally. In the meantime, he had appointed one of the senior hands as temporary foreman at the Double R. What happens now? Tabitha asked Seth as they walked from the sheriff's office back toward the store, where men were already working to repair the damaged door. We wait for Rutherford to arrive, Seth replied. Jenkins seems confident that with all the evidence, including Blackwell's attack last night, there's no question of your actions being anything but self-defense. Tabitha nodded, her thoughts drifting. I should prepare for school on Monday. The children will have heard about what happened. I need to decide what to tell them. Seth smiled at her practicality. Always the teacher. It's who I am, she said simply. As they reached the store, Mrs. Abernathy met them with news. Samuel Kirby's here in town. He's asking for both of you at the hotel restaurant. They found Samuel waiting with Franklin Wilson and Jeremiah Foster. The 3 men rose as Tabitha and Seth approached their table. Miss Moore, Samuel greeted her warmly. I'm relieved to see you unharmed after last night's ordeal. Please join us. We've been discussing the situation with Blackwell and the Double R. As they took their seats, Foster explained their concern. With Rutherford arriving soon and Blackwell likely facing serious charges, there's going to be significant disruption at the Double R. That affects the entire town's economy. We're trying to ensure a smooth transition, Wilson added. The Double R employs too many men for there to be any uncertainty about its future operations. How can we help? Seth asked. Samuel leaned forward. Wilson and Foster here have suggested that you might be willing to serve as interim foreman at the Double R, at least until Rutherford can make more permanent arrangements. Seth looked startled. Me? I just arrived in the territory. But you have extensive experience with large cattle operations, Samuel pointed out. And more importantly, you've shown the kind of integrity and leadership that's needed right now. The men at the Double R respect what you did for Miss Moore, Wilson added. Several have approached me privately to express their support. Seth glanced at Tabitha, clearly torn. It's a significant responsibility, and I had planned to work with my uncle at the Circle K. The offer is temporary, Foster assured him. Just until Rutherford arrives and can evaluate the situation himself, but having someone of your character step in immediately would go a long way toward stabilizing things. After a thoughtful pause, Seth nodded. If Rutherford agrees, I'll do it, for the good of the town. Excellent, Foster said, relief evident in his voice. I've drafted a telegram to Rutherford with the recommendation. With his approval, you could start as early as tomorrow. As the men continued discussing logistics, Tabitha found herself watching Seth. The role of foreman at the Double R would be demanding, taking much of his time and attention. She wondered what it might mean for whatever was growing between them. Seth must have sensed her thoughts, for he turned to meet her gaze, a silent question in his eyes. She smiled, trying to convey her support for his decision. Whatever happened, she would not stand in the way of this opportunity. Later, as they walked back to Mrs. Abernathy's store, Seth broached the subject directly. If I take this position, I'll have less time in town for a while. The Double R will need close attention to recover from Blackwell's methods. I understand, Tabitha assured him. It's an important responsibility. Seth stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Tabitha, these past days have been extraordinary. In the midst of all this trouble with Blackwell, I've found something I wasn't expecting to find in Casa Grande. Her heart quickened at his words. What's that? You, he said simply. Your courage, your kindness, your determination, they've affected me deeply. I don't want to lose what's starting between us, even if my duties take me to the Double R for a time. Tabitha felt a warm glow spread through her at his declaration. I don't want to lose it either, she admitted softly. These days have changed me too, Seth. You've shown me what a good man truly is. He reached for her hand, holding it gently in his own. Then we'll find a way to make this work. The double R isn't so far that I can't ride into town regularly, and perhaps on weekends you might visit the ranch. The suggestion sent a thrill through her, not just the prospect of seeing Seth, but the implicit understanding that whatever was between them was worth nurturing, worth making sacrifices for. "I'd like that," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment they stood there in the middle of the street, hands clasped, eyes locked, the bustle of Casa Grande fading to insignificance around them. Then, mindful of the public setting, Seth reluctantly released her hand. "I should check on the repair work at Mrs. Abernathy's," he said. "And then prepare for tomorrow if Rutherford approves the appointment." "Of course," Tabitha nodded. "And I should review my lessons for Monday." As they parted ways, each to their separate tasks, Tabitha felt a lightness in her step that had been absent for months. Despite the violence and fear of the past days, something beautiful had emerged, a connection with Seth that promised a future brighter than any she had imagined when she first came west. The following 2 days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Rutherford's telegram arrived promptly, approving Seth's appointment as interim foreman of the Double R. By sunset of the same day, Seth had moved into the foreman's quarters at the ranch and begun the process of assessing the operation. Vernon Blackwell regained consciousness under Dr. Patterson's care, but remained too weak to be moved to the town jail. Sheriff Jenkins posted a guard at the doctor's office to ensure he didn't attempt to flee once his condition improved. Tabitha returned to teaching, facing her students' inevitable questions with as much honesty as was appropriate for their young ears. To her relief, the children's parents had largely framed the events as a story of bravery and justice rather than violence, making her explanation easier. On Wednesday afternoon, as school was dismissing, a magnificent carriage drew up outside the schoolhouse. A distinguished-looking gentleman in an expensive suit stepped down, surveying the building with interest. "Miss Moore," he inquired as Tabitha emerged to see the last children off. "I am Edward Rutherford. Might I have a word?" Tabitha's surprise must have shown on her face, for Rutherford smiled kindly. "I've arrived to address the unfortunate situation with my former foreman. Before meeting with the town council, I wanted to speak with you personally." Inside the schoolhouse, Rutherford declined the chair Tabitha offered, instead walking around the room, examining the children's work displayed on the walls. "You've done remarkable things here, Miss Moore," he observed. "When I funded this school, I hoped it would bring education and refinement to Casa Grande. You seem to have accomplished that admirably." "Thank you, Mr. Rutherford. The children are eager learners." Rutherford nodded thoughtfully, then turned to face her directly. "I owe you an apology, Miss Moore. It appears I placed my trust in a man who abused his position in the most reprehensible way. Had I been more present, more attentive to the operation of the Double R, perhaps Blackwell's behavior might have been curtailed before it reached such a deplorable state." The apology, so straightforward and sincere, took Tabitha aback. "You couldn't have known, sir." "Perhaps not, but I should have," Rutherford sighed. "A man in my position bears responsibility for those he employs, especially those given authority over others." He paused. "I understand you were forced to defend yourself quite dramatically." Tabitha nodded, still uncomfortable discussing the shooting. "I had no choice. He meant to harm me." "Of course you had no choice," Rutherford agreed firmly. "Blackwell will face justice for his actions once he's well enough to stand trial. In the meantime, I want to assure you that the Double R stands ready to make any amends necessary for the trauma you've endured." "That's very generous, Mr. Rutherford, but unnecessary. I only want to continue teaching without fear." "And so you shall," he promised. "I've already spoken with Seth Kirby at the ranch. He's a most impressive young man, direct, knowledgeable, and principled. The men respect him already." At the mention of Seth, Tabitha couldn't suppress a smile. "Yes, he is. Quite remarkable." Rutherford caught the warmth in her voice and smiled knowingly. "Indeed. In fact, I'm considering offering him the foreman position permanently. He has exactly the combination of experience and character the Double R needs." This news both delighted and concerned Tabitha. A permanent position would give Seth security and status in Casa Grande, but it would also mean his time would be primarily devoted to the demanding work of managing the territory's largest ranch. Before she could respond, Rutherford continued, "However, such a position requires certain stability. A foreman represents not just the ranch but me personally in the community. Traditionally, it's a role best filled by a family man." Tabitha felt her cheeks warm as she grasped his implication. "Mr. Rutherford, I'm not sure what you're suggesting." He laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "I'm suggesting nothing, Miss Moore. Merely observing that life in the territories often progresses more rapidly than back east. Connections form quickly under challenging circumstances." His expression sobered. "I've lived long enough to recognize when two people share something special. Whatever develops between you and Mr. Kirby, you have my full support." With that, he bid her good day and departed for his meeting with the town council, leaving Tabitha both flustered and touched by his perceptiveness. The following Sunday, with school closed and her lessons prepared for the coming week, Tabitha accepted Seth's invitation to visit the Double R. He met her at the main house, his face lighting with pleasure as she dismounted from the horse Mrs. Abernathy had lent her. "Welcome to the Double R," he greeted her, taking the reins. "How was your ride?" "Pleasant," Tabitha replied, removing her gloves. "Though I'm still not the accomplished horsewoman I should be after 6 months in Arizona," Seth laughed. "You'll have plenty of opportunity to improve. There's no better place for riding than the open range." He gave her a tour of the ranch headquarters, the main house where Rutherford stayed during his infrequent visits, the bunkhouse where the hands lived, the cookhouse, barns, and corrals. The operation was impressive in its size and efficiency, making the Circle K seem modest by comparison. "Rutherford built all this?" Tabitha asked as they walked. "Started with almost nothing 20 years ago," Seth confirmed. "He has a good eye for land and cattle. The Double R runs some of the finest stock in the territory." "And now you're in charge of it all," Tabitha observed, noting the respect the ranch hands showed Seth as they passed. "Temporarily," he reminded her, "though Rutherford has hinted the position could become permanent." "He mentioned as much to me as well," Tabitha admitted. "He seems to think very highly of you." They had reached a small rise overlooking the ranch with the mountains visible in the distance. Seth stopped, turning to face her. "Tabitha, there's something I need to say." His expression was serious now, almost solemn. "These past 2 weeks have been the most extraordinary of my life. Coming to Casa Grande, meeting you, everything that's happened, it's all led me to this moment." Her heart began to race as he took her hands in his. "I know it's sudden," he continued. "By Eastern standards, we barely know each other. But out here, life moves differently. We face danger together. We see each other's true character revealed in moments of crisis." "Seth," Tabitha began, but he gently pressed a finger to her lips. "Please, let me finish. What I'm trying to say, not very eloquently, is that I've fallen in love with you, Tabitha Moore. Your courage, your compassion, your determination, everything about you has captured my heart completely." The declaration, so honest and heartfelt, brought tears to Tabitha's eyes. "Seth, you don't need to answer now," he assured her quickly. "I understand this is sudden. I just wanted you to know how I feel. If you need time, I don't," she interrupted, smiling through her tears. "I don't need time, Seth. What I was going to say is that I've fallen in love with you too." The joy that spread across his face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "You have," Tabitha nodded. "How could I not? You stood by me when few others would. You risked your own safety to protect mine. You've shown me what true strength looks like, not Blackwell's brutality, but your quiet integrity." Seth drew her closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Tabitha, I don't have much to offer yet. The foreman's position is still temporary, and even if it becomes permanent, it's not a fortune. But I promise you this. I will love you and honor you every day of my life if you'll have me." Understanding dawned on Tabitha as she realized what he was asking. "Seth Kirby, are you proposing to me?" He smiled, a touch of nervousness showing through his usual confidence. "I suppose I am. Not very traditionally, I'm afraid. I don't even have a ring yet." "I don't need tradition," Tabitha said softly, "or a ring, just you, Seth, that's all I need. Then you'll marry me?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." The kiss that followed was tender and sweet, a promise of all that was to come. When they finally parted, both were smiling so broadly it almost hurt. "I can't believe this is happening," Tabitha admitted. "6 months ago, I was a spinster schoolteacher from Boston, resigned to a life alone. And now, and now you're going to be Mrs. Seth Kirby," he finished, his voice warm with wonder. "We'll build a life here together, Tabitha, a good life." As they walked back toward the ranch hand in hand, Tabitha felt a deep sense of rightness settle over her. The path that had led her to Casa Grande had been uncertain and at times frightening, but it had brought her to this moment, this man, this future full of promise. Edward Rutherford was not surprised when Seth and Tabitha approached him later that afternoon with their news. His congratulations were warm and accompanied by a practical gift, the offer of the foreman's position on a permanent basis, with the use of a small house on the ranch property that had originally been built for the owner's son. "It needs some renovation," Rutherford admitted, "but it would provide you with privacy and comfort while still keeping Seth close to his duties." The generosity of the offer touched them both deeply. "Thank you, Mr. Rutherford," Seth said, shaking the older man's hand firmly. "We accept with gratitude." "No need for gratitude," Rutherford replied. "It's a sound business decision. The Double R needs a foreman who will lead with integrity. You've already proven yourself to be that man." The news of their engagement spread quickly through Casa Grande. Mrs. Abernathy was among the first to offer congratulations, though she claimed to have seen it coming from the moment Seth walked into her store. "The way you two looked at each other," she said, wiping away a happy tear. "I knew right then it was meant to be." The children in Tabitha's class were equally delighted, though more for the prospect of a party than for the romance of it all. They peppered her with questions about her dress, the cake, and whether they would all be invited to the wedding. Vernon Blackwell's trial was held a month later, once he had recovered enough from his wound to appear in court. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Multiple women testified to his pattern of harassment and violence, culminating in Tabitha's account of the night he broke into Mrs. Abernathy's store with clear intent to harm her. Despite his attempts to portray himself as the victim of a conspiracy, the jury needed only 2 hours to find him guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in the territorial prison, effectively ending his influence in Casa Grande forever. "He'll never work as a foreman or in any position of authority again," Seth observed as they left the courthouse after the sentencing. "His reputation is destroyed throughout the territory." "Justice is served," Tabitha agreed. "Now we can truly put this behind us and look to our future." That future arrived more swiftly than either had anticipated. With Rutherford's blessing and financial assistance, the small house on the Double R property was quickly renovated to suit their needs. A date was set for the wedding, a simple ceremony to be held in the town church, followed by a celebration at the ranch. On a perfect October morning, with the desert blooming around them and the mountains standing witness in the distance, Tabitha Moore became Tabitha Kirby. She wore a gown of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Abernathy and several other women from town had helped her make. Seth, handsome in a new suit, watched her walk down the aisle with wonder in his eyes, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "I, Seth, take you, Tabitha, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his voice strong and sure. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." As Tabitha repeated her own vows, she felt a profound sense of peace. The journey that had brought her to this moment had been unexpected, and at times frightening, but standing here, pledging her life to this good, honorable man, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister declared to the packed church. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The celebration at the Double R afterward was the most festive gathering Casa Grande had seen in years. Ranch hands and townspeople mingled freely, dancing to fiddle music under the open sky, enjoying the abundant food and drink Rutherford had provided for the occasion. As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the land, Seth drew Tabitha away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking the same view where he had proposed. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "When I came west, I was looking for independence, for a chance to build a life on my own terms. I never expected to find love." "Life has a way of surprising us," Seth observed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "When I left Texas, I was just looking for a fresh start, a chance to work alongside my uncle. Instead, I found my purpose and my heart." As they stood together, watching the sun sink below the horizon in a blaze of color, Tabitha reflected on the strange, winding path that had led her here. The teaching position that had brought her to Casa Grande, Vernon Blackwell's unwanted attentions that had so frightened and degraded her, the courage she'd found within herself to stand against him, and Seth, the unexpected champion who had entered her life at precisely the right moment. "What are you thinking?" Seth asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "That sometimes the worst experiences can lead to the greatest joys," she replied. "If not for Blackwell's cruelty, we might never have met." Seth considered this. Perhaps we would have found each other anyway. "Some things are just meant to be." Tabitha smiled up at him, heart full. "I like that thought, that no matter what, we would have found our way to each other." "Mrs. Kirby," Seth said, the name still new and wonderful on his lips, "I believe with all my heart that we were destined to be together. And now we have our whole lives ahead of us to build our home, raise our family, grow old together." "Our family," Tabitha repeated softly, a secret smile playing on her lips. "Sooner than you might think." Seth's eyes widened as he understood her meaning. "Tabitha, are you saying?" She nodded, joy bubbling up inside her. "Dr. Patterson confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby, Seth. By late spring, we'll be parents." The look of pure, unrestrained happiness that transformed Seth's face was everything Tabitha could have hoped for. He lifted her gently, spinning her around once before setting her carefully back on her feet. "A baby," he breathed, wonder in his voice. "Our child." He placed a reverent hand on her still flat stomach. "I promise you both, I'll be the best husband and father I can possibly be." "I know you will," Tabitha said with absolute confidence. "Our child will grow up surrounded by love, learning the values that matter most: courage, kindness, integrity, the very qualities that define you, Seth Kirby." As they rejoined the celebration, sharing their news with their closest friends, Tabitha felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun with her arrival in Casa Grande 6 months earlier was now complete. What had started in fear and uncertainty had transformed into love, security, and the promise of a family. In the years that followed, the Kirbys became one of the most respected families in the territory. Seth's management of the Double R set new standards for ranching operations throughout Arizona. Tabitha continued teaching until their son, Matthew, was born, then devoted herself to raising him and the daughter, Elizabeth, who followed 2 years later. When the children were old enough for school, Tabitha returned to teaching, eventually becoming the headmistress of Casa Grande's expanded school. Together, she and Seth worked to build educational opportunities for all children in the territory, regardless of background or means. Vernon Blackwell became a distant memory, a cautionary tale of power abused and justice served. His name was rarely mentioned in Casa Grande, and when it was, it carried none of the weight or influence it once had. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Seth surprised Tabitha with a gift: the deed to a piece of land adjacent to the Double R, purchased with his savings over the years. "For our future," he explained as they stood on the property, watching their children explore the small creek that ran through it. "One day, when Matthew and Elizabeth are grown, we'll build our own ranch here, not as grand as the Double R, perhaps, but ours." "It's perfect," Tabitha said, leaning against his shoulder. "Everything I could have dreamed of and more." As the sun set on that anniversary day, painting the desert in shades of gold and purple, Seth pulled Tabitha into his arms. "10 years ago, you made me the happiest man alive by becoming my wife. Every day since has been a blessing. Even when I was enormously pregnant and impossibly moody," Tabitha teased. "Even then," Seth laughed. "Especially then," his expression grew serious. "I love you, Tabitha Kirby." More today than yesterday, and less than I will tomorrow. And I love you, she replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. My protector, my partner, my heart. As their children ran back toward them, calling excitedly about the frogs they'd discovered in the creek, Tabitha felt a profound gratitude wash over her. The journey that had brought her west had been fraught with challenges and dangers she could never have anticipated. Yet every step, every struggle, had led her to this moment surrounded by the family she and Seth had created together, secure in a love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger for it. In the distance, Casa Grande was visible, the town now prosperous and growing. The Double R Ranch house stood proud against the horizon, a testament to what could be built with vision and integrity. And here, on this plot of land that would one day be their own ranch, the future stretched before them, rich with promise. Seth's arm tightened around her waist, as if he could read her thoughts. Together, they watched their children's joyful exploration. Their laughter carrying on the desert breeze the sweetest sound either had ever heard, the living embodiment of the love that had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances and grown into something beautiful beyond measure.